On Comprehensive Job Creation Plan to order. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee. The Council President will be joining us shortly, but we're going to go ahead and begin with public comment. So I'd like to ask Mr. Spindler to come forward. Mr. Spindler, you have 5 minutes to speak on all of the agenda items and general public comment.
Okay. All right. So we have Economic Workforce Development Department to report in response by motion in item 1 relative to an analysis of Assembly Bill 2 and a determination of the 31 former community redevelopment agencies, as well as communities located outside. So they want to bring back these CRAs. Yes, they've done a good job for job creation. That's why LA hasn't created a single net job in more than 20 years. Everything you guys do at City Hall, a job comes in and then they leave. The biggest failure was yesterday's announcement by the NFL for that stadium. So AEG was over in the other building last week trying to get that stadium built, that Farmers Field joke. And the NFL, by a vote of 31-2, voted to give the city of Inglewood a $4.4 billion windfall. And we could have had that. $4.4 billion windfall, 2 Super Bowls in the next 10 years, 8 home games plus 2 preseason games. They're going to be playing the Rams over in the city of Inglewood. Now, why couldn't LA get that team? Well, there's 2 reasons why. It's about jobs. See, first of all, we have a councilman named Councilman Koretz, who wanted to one time put a tax on seats to all sporting events. And the NFL looked at that in the middle of the AEG project and realized they could not deal with the LA City Council and the mayor. They just couldn't trust them. So then we had back in the day when the Dodgers were still owned by that very nice family, the O'Malley family, and they wanted to take Dodger Stadium, tear it down, build an NFL stadium, and get land in South Park and build a metropolitan-based stadium for the Dodgers. Instead, Steve Soboroff had to have the South Park area to build his AEG stadium. So yes, we did steal the Lakers, we did steal the Kings from our friends from Inglewood, and yesterday they repaid our favor for jobs. They got the Rams. And the reason why they got the Rams is because Stan Kroenke understands business, and he knows LA is not a place to come to do business. So what veto is that? And on this whole meeting today, are we going to discuss the failure of getting that NFL franchise? We could have maybe got 2. But because we can't work with our business partners, because we drove the O'Malley family out of LA County, they had to go down and buy up over there for the Padres, and we tried to steal their team, which was the Chargers. Now we have to suffer as we watch other people get what we should have gotten. And that's the problem with jobs. You guys want to pay people to come here to create jobs. The only way you create jobs is to have a magnet. You got to start with an environment where people that are in private business feel comfortable. How can you feel comfortable when you know that each council district has to be paid for with campaign donations? And Herb Wesson Jr. holds his meetings on television and throws out people when they only get 1 minute to speak. So how can a business person come here and trust you with their business? Now, the city of Inglewood can be trusted because it's a small city and you have people there that understand that 2 Super Bowls and all of those games is billions of dollars of investment. And there's no reason why we couldn't have done that. What a shameful, disgusting failure this city is when it comes to job creation. And I'm glad you have this ad hoc creation plan, because I'm going to go downstairs And I'm going to talk about homelessness and poverty, which is the real business of Los Angeles. So you'll keep building your apartments, you'll keep stealing Section 8 federal funds, and right now, here's the big gangster that just walked in the room, the chairman of the board, Herb Wesson Jr., and that's good because he comes in time not to listen to this, but the NFL vetoed this city. He vetoed Herb Wesson Jr., and he told the world L.A. cannot be trusted for jobs.
All right, are there any other cards?
No.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Any other cards of general public comment? All right, general public comment is closed, and public comment on each of the agenda items is closed. Have a nice day, Mr. Spindler. All right.
We should have medication in the back in case somebody needs to take it.
I was concerned. No, you don't speak out in my meeting, or else you'll be asked to leave. Okay, can you ask Mr. Spindler to leave the meeting so he stops disrupting? Have him leave. Goodbye, Mr. Spindler. Have a great day. Out, out, out.
Some days I can control myself better than others.
Thank you. All right. Item number 1. Oh, geez. Come on up, Ms. Perry. Item number 1.
Item number 1 is the Economic Workforce Development Department to report in response to motion Buscaino-Cedillo relative to an analysis of Assembly Bill 2 and a determination on which of the 31 former Community Redevelopment Agency Los Angeles project areas, as well as communities located outside those areas, would be eligible for the Community Revitalization and Investment Authority designation. This item has also been referred to the Economic Development Committee.
All right. Ms. Perry, welcome. I think we can actually take 1 and 2 together.
Yeah, I think that works.
And this is a continuation of the
Right.
initial dialogue that we had at the last meeting and then continued yesterday in the Economic Development Committee. Thank you for your work on this. Why don't you go ahead and fill us in on where the department is now in its work in preparing these reports and what still remains to be done, what you've initially learned.
Right. And then to my right is our Chief Grants Administrator, Meg Barclay, who will actually walk you through the charts. And if you don't mind, what I'd like to do is go through item 1, because item 2 is relatively straightforward and simple, and just give the overview and set the stage. And then you may, either one of you may have questions about your individual council districts. But what we promised to you was a preliminary analysis of council districts and former redevelopment project areas, or as you know them as RPAs, according to the demographic statistical criteria set forth in AB 2 or the CREAs, an area to be designated as the Community Revitalization and Investment Area, CREA, ergo CREA. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the handouts that we brought to you today, and each one has it broken down by council district to discuss the results. Now, as I stated before, AB2 or the CREA guidelines outline criteria areas that one must meet in order to qualify as a CREA. The first one, again, is not less than 80% of the land calculated by census tract or block group has an annual median income of 80% less than the statewide annual median income. And just by way of fact, the statewide annual median income is $49,000 a year, approximately. And in addition to that, so that's an and, you have to meet unemployment 3% higher than the statewide median unemployment, crime rates that are 5% higher than the statewide median crime rate, deteriorated or inadequate infrastructure, and then deteriorated commercial or residential structures. So just
Before you move forward on that, because we've talked about this multiple times and it's only just occurring to me now, how small of an area does it need to be broken down to make that analysis? Because unemployment and crime statistics, well, crime statistics we do at a more microscopic level than maybe unemployment, which, is it by census tract?
you can focus on census tract, or as you can also use as a block group within a census tract. And I think where you find the point that the filters all have a confluence where
Yeah.
they align with the area median income and the 80%, and then you start layering on the other ones. And then if you still don't get there, and you'll find when Meg goes through the council districts, some of them we actually got there, and I think it was 8, 9, and 15.
On income.
Okay, all right, I don't want to throw her off, but, and then the others we didn't. So let me go
Okay,
through this, and then
all right.
she's going to walk you through some
Yep.
examples of what we're talking about. So you asked us to do this analysis at the council district level, and what you're going to see in a minute, at none of the council districts or the former redevelopment project areas have 80% of block groups with less than 80% of the state annual median income, or 3% higher unemployment and 5% crime. And when I was talking to our grants administrator about this, I said, how's that possible? And we talked about a couple of different scenarios, which, again, I'll let her go into, but one of which was, people may be living in a census tract or an area, and they may not make a lot of money, but they do have jobs. They may be low-paying jobs, but they have jobs. So you'll see in just a second as she goes through this that 4 of the redevelopment project areas have 80% of census tracts that meet income criteria and either unemployment or crime criteria. So those 4 redevelopment project areas that fall into this category are the Broadway Manchester area, which meet income and unemployment requirements. Watts, again, income and unemployment. Vermont Manchester, income and crime statistics, and then Los Angeles Harbor, income and crime. Once you get this presentation, I'll circle back with you on a couple of ideas, but I want to put them out on the table now. This is, we can provide informational briefings if you want to continue to pursue this for each council district in a way that doesn't violate the Brown Act, or we can notice it, so we can sit down with the maps, project them on the wall with the street names on there, so people can really drill down and see if you want to undertake this or not. Obviously, we're here then dedicated to continued analysis of qualifying census block groups in each district, and that may include having to make some adjustments here or there to see that we can either form a CREA or an EIFD. And council office input would be helpful because some areas will qualify for CREAs and others will be more suited for an EIFD. So Meg is going to go through the attachments that you have there and go through the differences between the two. And in the first attachment, you'll see that the redevelopment project areas meet all 3 statistical criteria, and then attachment 2, which also has council district maps, there's a distinction, and the distinction is that it's on unemployment criteria alone and separate and distinct from the crime criteria. But why don't I stop now and then let her go through the maps with you, and then I can come back.
So I'll just walk you through what's in each of the attachments. So the summary charts in attachment 1, the first chart is broken down by council district, and it shows the percent of block groups within each council district that meet all 3 of the 3 CREA qualifying criteria. So that's the blue column. And then next to that, we have the percentage of block groups that meet income and unemployment or income and crime. And in order to qualify as a CREA, again, an area has to have 80% of the block groups that meet income and then 3 of those 4 other criteria. So it follows that, you can see that none of them pass that 80% threshold by council district, which is a very big area, not too surprising. But we also provide the percentage of block groups in each of the council districts that meet each of the individual criteria, just for context. So that's just sort of some, if you had a question about the percentage of block groups in your council district that meet the income criteria, which is that first threshold, that's provided here as well. And then the next chart does the same thing, but by redevelopment project area. So that's the second summary chart in attachment 1. And then we go into 2 sets of maps. So you'll see the first map group in attachment 2 shows for each council district, the block groups that meet income, unemployment, and Part 1 crime, so all 3 of those criteria, and those are shown in brown, and the block groups that meet income and unemployment criteria alone. So that would just show that they get over the income threshold, and they also meet the unemployment criteria. And then there's another set that starts on...
Sorry, just so I'm understanding this right. So since 2 of the criteria are subjective,
Right.
honestly, we really only need to get one of the
One
objective
past median.
criteria
That's why
plus
we asked
the
for the
80%
second.
of AMI.
Exactly.
So if you take these 2 colors together, the orange and the brown,
Mm-hmm.
you have the universe of places that are eligible under the 80% of AMI
Right.
plus one objective criteria,
Exactly.
and then we would add on the subjective criteria
Exactly.
where applicable.
Yes, that's exactly why we asked for the second set of analysis. So, and then starting on page 16 of attachment 2, we start with a second set of maps, the second map group, which shows for each council district again, so there's 15 maps, show the block groups again in brown that meet the income, unemployment, and Part 1 crime, and the block groups that meet income and crime alone. So that, again, it's just a different way of looking at it. You can imagine this gets almost factorial in nature when you start asking these questions, and our consultants have been really, really helpful in helping us refine the question. But so this was our first cut. We actually have some other data around a subset of the crime because the legislation doesn't specify which crimes. So if you take a subset of Part 1 crime, we actually have some data around violent crime and property crime individually as opposed to, and those are a lower bar to get over. So we can, but it was just a lot of information to provide for today. So
Right.
This is what we've got for today, and we're planning to move forward from there.
It's a really good start. Now, remind me that under AB2, are there any requirements of contiguity, or can we have?
You can have them all over the place. They
All
don't have
over
to
the
be
place.
contiguous.
Okay.
I can't, yeah.
No, they
It
don't
just
have
has
to
to
be
be that 80% of the block groups
Yeah.
within the defined area meet the criteria.
Okay. So we
Yeah,
could have a
so-
list of 100 different areas across the
Absolutely.
city, and these would be.
But, there is, I know I have done a lot of reading about this. There is, just like in redevelopment areas, that if you can make an argument of a finding of economic benefit or nexus, that there is some writing on that. But yeah, you
Right.
can have, if you can see.
I would assume that that's sort of presumed by the decisions that the legislature made in
Right.
how to define it. So we might even be preempted from, finding. Well, I don't want to go down that road, but they've already made that assessment
Right.
and decided that if you meet these criteria, then there is a nexus for, or at least
Yeah.
I would make that argument. Okay. It seems to me that Los Angeles is probably disadvantaged in this too, because 80% of statewide AMI doesn't reflect lack of affordability.
That's right.
And so, whereas, we may have places where people are making the state average in income, they're still significantly
afford to live there.
handicapped because of
Yeah.
the price of housing and everything
Right.
else. Might want to talk to some of our legislators about that, Mr. Wesson.
Good idea.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you short.
No, that actually gets in. That's just the last attachment is just a quick summary of the methodology for the analysis. So that was I was almost done.
Very good. Very good on both of you, by both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And okay, and so then you're
So if you're interested in us having an information briefing, we can take a day and set aside like 45 minutes per council district and get the maps on the wall and come over to the 4th floor media room. And, we'll work with the city attorney to make sure we're not violating the Brown Act. Right?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And then I think also, since we now have something tangible to really make an assessment, what I'd like to do is have in our March meeting,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to have your department and the CLA
That's fine.
collectively come back with some recommendations
Mm-hmm.
for actual, an actual policy recommendation based on this.
All right, and would you like with us to work with, do this briefing with your staffs before we come back? So we have a sense of which way everybody's leaning? or
Yeah, I
would you-
think so.
Okay.
I mean, at least so that they understand what the opportunity is within their own area.
Okay.
And,
And this,
We would want to take advantage of it. I think that's an excellent idea.
and this is all done, pending the CLA is doing a more extensive review of the administrative requirements and recommendations for actually forming, the formational requirements around the CREA. This is really around areas that are at this point, so we're looking forward to that analysis as well.
Yeah, because they can help
There's
us
plenty
tweak
more
it.
information to get.
yeah.
If I-
Go ahead,
Do
please.
we know when they're planning on releasing that or that would be
I don't know the
completed?
date for that report.
CLA?
No.
Yeah,
No.
CLA.
I'm not sure of the date yet, but we can get that information to you.
I'm curious
Okay.
to make sure that it works with what Ms. Perry and her team want to do.
Well, so at our next meeting in March, we're going to have all that. So we're going
Okay,
to have
so
to
this,
have
that
that.
gives us enough time to do the outreach.
Yeah.
And just so you know, the two graduate students who did this for us over the holidays are here. I'd just like for them to stand up and give their names again.
Michael Miller and Savea, and I apologize, I can't say your last name.
Where's the other?
They're here.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself. What are your names?
Matthew
Sorry.
Miller.
I'm Matt Miller.
Well, thank you very much. Good work on this.
Yeah, they did a
Very
good job.
interesting work. Thank you for.
Very willing to work over the holidays without complaining. So it's really great.
Can't
Well,
beat
just
that.
know that you're laying the foundation for something that might make a very impactful change in this city. So thank you very much. Okay,
So-
so that's AB2.
Great. Okay, you want me to roll into two then?
Please.
All right, so you asked us, the committee asked us to look at other cities and give you a site-specific summary or overview or menu of ideas of what other cities are doing. So we looked at cities not in Los Angeles County, and Meg has prepared a very nice spreadsheet, what do you call it, chart? Yes, a chart. And we've got the cities listed on the left side, Los Angeles to Burbank, Commerce, Culver City, whoops, I'm sorry, the ones we listed for you are in the county. And we looked at other cities. Boston was one of the better ones, and I'll let Meg tell you about that. But the benefits of these incentives that we have listed here for you they're revenue generators and thus lead to job creation. And so these are the ones that we've listed here. And even though there are some redundancies, because in fact we do administer industrial development bonds already, I know building and safety does have fast-track processes in place, and of course, the city clerk administers the numerous business improvement districts, and we are looking to create a micro-lending fund. But the new things that are on here that I know, utility users tax, and then concept of a dedicated project coordinator, ombudsman, possibly over in planning, and then a recycling market development zone, which May can tell you about. We already have electronic plan submission in planning, and I think in building and safety. And then we've been down this road before, but maybe it's time to talk about it again, about defrayal or discount on development impact fees.
So on the tax components of this, these are all, like, Glendale has no business tax. Do any of these cities have targeted tax reductions or rebates or anything like that? Because some of these deal not so much with incentivization of new businesses, but just general policies, which some people might describe as being business friendly.
Sure.
And I distinguish those two because when I'm thinking of incentives, I'm thinking of what is it that we can go out and
Target.
use to get somebody to
Right.
come,
Right.
rather than just our general sales pitch about our business friendly.
When you look at some of the larger cities, particularly in the East Coast, or even in places like Detroit that have overhauled their entire economy and gone back to agribusiness in many ways, where there was light industrial and manufacturing, but they're rebuilding themselves and coming out of bankruptcy. And so in that sense, there's an effort in that city to use the tax incentives to cause businesses to want to come in there and to establish and to accelerate and expand. New York is another city that focuses a lot on biotech research and development, and in fact offer an enormous menu of tax incentives to come there, stay there, and grow. And again, not only establish, but to retain and to accelerate. Boston, again, I know Meg has done an enormous amount of research on Boston, so she may have something that she might want to add on what Boston does, but they seem to be among the more creative of the larger cities in the country in terms of the incentives they offer. Just in our own, and I'll stop in a minute and let you talk, in our own experience in the department, the frequency of discussion focuses on biotech, healthcare, culinary, and research and development as it relates to technology. Many of the companies that come through there feel that they're not enjoying the benefit of what's going on around Playa Vista with the larger companies like Google and LinkedIn or Microsoft, and that it's not trickling over into other communities. The cost of housing is very high in that area. The one thing that is happening is that people who are working over there seem to be moving east into more affordable areas. So in that sense, it's bringing some benefit to the real estate market, but in terms of employability and, again, reaching into those areas that we want to reach deeply into, we're still having a hard time breaking that wall down. So you got anything to add?
Oh, no. So I just to clarify, and I apologize if this was misleading. So the information that's in this chart actually came out of the LA EDC study on business incentives, and we're planning to do some more research into, more specifics about the incentives that they're offering. So at this point, just on the kind of shorter turnaround, we didn't have much time to do make calls and find out the details about these programs. And we wanted to, the other cities were already starting to look into analogous programs that they may have. We've reached out to Boston in particular on their lending practices, public lending practices, because they're a pretty good model. Just from when I was at HUD, they were well known for being very good at structuring lending programs using public funds. And we're also going to be reaching out to Philadelphia because they also have a pretty good reputation for economic development in the public sector. Specifically, those were two, when I was just my experience, grantees that were very well known for doing things very innovatively.
Great. So this page gives us kind of a little
sort
bit
of
of
the lay of the land.
beginning of a menu.
Yes.
And a plan of some other areas that you're still going to look into.
And then specifically, we do want to look at how they are targeting these incentives, or
Yeah.
if they're just citywide, and then whether or not they are tied to any kinds of targets for job creation or revenue generation.
Yeah. I'm really looking to get to meat on the bones. This is how a policy in this other city has been working. These are the elements of it. Wherever there are areas that are competing effectively with us for jobs, I want to know what they're doing well. And people always talk. I'm running the risk of going on a rant here, but I'm tired of hearing about Dallas and Houston and how all these businesses are moving there. And 9 times out of 10, the businesses that move there are not moving there because of anything that those cities have done. They're moving there because of state law, policy on, environment or on labor or other things. They're moving there because of the cost of housing. They're moving there for a wide variety or consolidation of their headquarters or any number of other things. And we get branded as losing another business when it's nonsense. 9 out of 10 times that's true. But that 1 out of 10 times when somebody is actually doing something to entice a business or grow a business that we might otherwise be able to compete for, what are those municipal policies that are working effectively? That's what I want this to be, is to really create the menu of best practices of things that we have not yet done that other more forward-looking cities on economic development have already started to do effectively? How can we learn from their experiences? So,
That's great guidance.
so this, and, it's good to know what people in the county are doing because they are in the same boat as we are in terms
should
of
tell you
state
something about
policies,
that,
housing
too.
costs, and so on. And so,
They have a motion pending right now on streamlining, I'm sorry, they have a motion pending right now streamlining their procurement process.
I'm sorry, who does?
Yes, Los
Oh, the
Angeles County, yeah. And I've been working, I actually am the supervisor's appointee on the Small Business Commission too, so it kind of crosses over and it's perfect because they want to collaborate. And what they have is, a huge network, much larger than ours, but we have a delivery system. We have the 9 business source centers where we can actually reach pretty much into anybody's community. So we'll be working together with them because they want to focus on subcontractors and bringing them up, to prime status because subcontractors is where the diversity is
Right.
really in terms of competing for government work and that opportunity. So they just debated it or discussed it the other day, and we'll be moving forward so we can bring the benefit of that report to the next committee, I think,
Great.
because they are doing a lot of outreach throughout the county to see who has best practices too,
Great.
for small businesses.
This doesn't have to be the comprehensive Bible by next March, but I'd like to get as much meat on the bones as we can, particularly of other competitors within the county, but also the bigger cities across the country that are creating business opportunity and jobs effectively. I'd like to get as much of that as we can by our next meeting in March, and I'd like the CLA to participate in that report as well because it's going to be time to start putting pen to paper on actually creating some of these policies here. So,
Okay, and in the meantime, we'll do the briefing sessions.
great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
And
you.
two.
So we'll go ahead and continue this in committee, these 2 matters until March, and then ask for more detailed report back from the department in collaboration with the CLA on policy recommendations in those areas.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
work.
Any other questions?
No, I
Mr.
just want
West?
to say this, we're getting, I think, to where we want to get, where we can get this data and, like you say, put more meat on the bones. I think we're getting there. This was good.
All right. Very good. That brings up item number 3.
Item number 3 is the city clerk report in response to motion Fuentes Blumenfeld relative to the Business Improvement District best practices, legal issues, and policy restrictions. This item has also been referred to the Economic Development Committee.
All right. Ms. Walcott, welcome.
Good afternoon, Holly Walcott, City Clerk. With me is Miranda Pastor, who is our division chief for the Neighborhood and Business Improvement Division, Improvement District Division. As a continuation of last meeting, we have put our recommendations in writing. We have organized our report into 4 specific areas: public relations and capacity building, electronic platform, interdepartmental collaborations, and legislative/Prop 218 baseline service agreements. So all of our, when we were comparing other cities and what they did well with business improvement districts, we've categorized them into these specific areas and come up with a series of recommendations that are explained throughout the report, but then summarized. There are 11 different recommendations. Most of them are with existing resources within the city clerk's office, i.e. the Business Improvement District, the Business Improvement District Trust Fund. And so what we're proposing is using funds from there. Under our first recommendation would be to go out to RFP for a public relations campaign, public information. That seemed to work very well for
The City of New York.
the City of New York. We also wanted,
Before you move off that, but to what objective? Public outreach for what purpose? To entice business communities to create bids or for,
To make people aware of, to make the business community and property-based areas of commercial areas of city aware that the bid program exists, or that bids exist, and that that's an economic tool that they could use to help revitalize their areas. Because one of the major things we run into is people don't know what bids are.
Right, but the businesses within the bids know what the bids are.
Right,
And,
so
and
we're
anybody
trying to-
outside of the bid is not going to benefit from that unless they create their own bid. So is the idea
That's
to...
the idea,
Is to-
Okay.
Yes.
is to get more bids, is to create an atmosphere where the whole idea of a bid is something, oh, well, I want one too.
Okay.
In the city of New York, Mayor Bloomberg, when he was in office, he would speak at every event he went to talk about business improvement districts and to encourage businesses to look into that, establishing them. So he just kind of did a one-man campaign, and they used other nonprofit companies to do additional campaigning, and they now have 72 bids.
City of LA has 42?
Yes.
42 currently. As far as leadership and administrative recommendations, what we're looking to do is help bids, those especially that have volunteer. The smaller ones probably need more help than the larger ones, but making sure that they have all the support that they need, both in terms of administration and capacity building. E-platform, we're going to work internally with our systems to see that if we can make it so that documents, management district plans, annual reports, monthly reports, quarterly reports can be submitted electronically. And also we hope with doing that, we create kind of a standard, and it makes it easier for them to do. Just fill in numbers and not make it so labor intensive. Do you want to talk a little bit about the connectedness one? That's the convening various departments and
Right. One of the, just to start off, one of the things that we learned is that most of the time in most of the cities I researched, the bid unit was housed in their economic development section and or worked closely with their economic development section. And so there should be more connectivity or cooperation between maybe the mayor's office of small business administration as well as economic and workforce development, economic development activities, or any other department's economic development activities. Something that's not in the report is even cooperation from city departments. For instance, sometimes the bids have problems getting permits to put banners up to advertise their programs, or permits to do a repair on a sidewalk. And so they're even though they might have in their management district plans approval to do these projects, landscaping, what have you, some repair that would help the city and themselves, they can't get a permit to implement those programs.
I've heard that a time or two in my district.
So working with them as well as with the police department. One of the things that San Francisco does is they have, as well as New York, they have a baseline services agreement that says when a bid starts, they're going to continue these same services that they were doing before a bid formed. And state law requires that the services stay the same.
Right.
We don't have that. And in many cases, and I probably shouldn't say it over the mic, that doesn't happen here.
well, that's one of our.
So let me, because I was going to ask about that. Let me take a step back so I make sure I understand that. So under the New York bid statute, tell me what it says about the baseline.
Well, actually, what I was saying was the state of California has a law in the Streets and Highways Code. It says the baseline level of services should stay the same. And in New York, one of their incentives for encouraging bid formation is to say that the baseline level of services will stay the same. So they have agreement with those people forming a business improvement district to keep their baseline services the same. So for instance, street cleaning, street sweeping, if they have some economic development incentives in that area, those stay there. I won't say what doesn't happen here,
But I guess I'm not seeing the difference. What's the difference between California and New York law on that?
I don't think there's a difference in law. I think what she's saying is there's a difference in how the law is then implemented.
Right.
In other words, they actually establish a baseline service agreement,
I see.
but that's one of our later recommendations. What this particular one was for us to develop,
departments.
bring all the departments together
Together.
and work more closely together, as either a task force or some type of ongoing working group between interdepartmental lines so that we can address some of these issues. So recommendation number 7 is request the Office of the City Clerk, Mayor's Office of Economic Development, Office of Finance, EWDD, Board of Public Works meet and report back with recommendations on streamlining inclusivity efforts, including but not limited to a plan to include business improvement districts as a permanent part of the various economic development strategies, and an information and communication strategy between the pertinent departments. So that particular, and then to jump to the baseline, I think we're going to have to delve into that a little further. One of the issues we've had on an ongoing basis with baseline services is we can say services won't change, but then we've all been here through the 2008 forward budget problems that were not necessarily bid related, but when we had to cut back on services, so there's some kind of, there's a middle ground there somewhere where we can say, these are the baseline of services, but I would be concerned of saying, okay, well, we're going to put 4 officers there every weekend when we know deployment doesn't work that way. And I'm not quite sure how, street services, I'm sure the sweeping schedules and those type of schedules were probably a little more regular. And not, based on crime analysis. But I think there's more work to be done in this area.
Yeah, and I guess the distinction is that whatever state law requires, unless you do it on a community-by-community basis, you're not going to have any real useful metrics to measure whether or not the services have remained the same for just the reason you say, because a lot of them fluctuate based on all sorts of factors. Not least of which is the state of the city's budget. So, but if you have measurable benchmarks for each bid, then, and you have an agreement with the bid,
Right.
then you can presumably measure that and see whether services, the baseline is maintained over the course of time. Okay.
So, and on, I'm trying to think where the baseline's.
There's an attachment, a sample of a. You mean which recommendation?
All right, recommendation number 9 is that the LAPD, Board of Public Works, and we work with the Office of the City Clerk to report back regarding the feasibility of establishing baseline service agreements for new and renewing business improvement districts. So it's, again, more on that micro level that you're discussing, but it's not something we can just, flip the switch on today.
Yeah.
Then we need more assistance from the city attorney to work with the state on Prop 218 because that still remains an ongoing fly in the ointment. We've made improvements, but it's still the definition of general benefit still eludes most communities and cities and other districts in the state. And so those are basically our recommendations, and we're happy to answer any additional questions.
Mr. Wesson?
No, other than I do want to, and this is a really serious note, I'm really beginning to feel good about the direction where we're going. These meetings, every meeting is better than the last meeting and more substantive. So I'm just excited, can't wait for the next meeting. I appreciate all of the work that you've done, and Ms. Perry and her team has done as well. I think we're getting there to the time, because I want action.
I hope so.
I think we're getting to that point.
All right.
And to you, Mr. Chair, great job bringing in the right people to give us the right data.
Thank you. So these are, I think, all excellent recommendations, and I'm prepared to move them forward. Are these supposed to go to economic development as well?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you just one question, though. Forgive me if I've asked you this before and I've forgotten the answer. Why is all this stuff in the clerk's office? What's the history that causes
I
bids to
think
be
it
at
was
clerk's?
because back in, it was the late 80s, we still had tax and permit in the city clerk's office. This was prior to Office of Finance and the treasurer becoming, and the Office of Finance being created in 2000. So prior to that, tax and permit was part of the city clerks, and so was land records. So, and we had the e-tax, and so we had the people that, and we still have some of the people, although now that land records has moved to Bureau of Engineering, we still have some of the mapping people, and of course everything's now online, so it's easier for us to access the information, but it's now just kind of remained with the city clerk. There was an effort made, what was it, 2 years ago? To move it to, 3 years ago, to move it to economic development, but it became a space problem where they were going through trouble at the Garland building, so they were not able to be. And
Needed what?
a public counter.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to muddy the waters by trying to add any to these recommendations, but if you do give it some additional thought now that time, we've had 3 years of time passing, if there are more, if you think, or you, Ms. Perry, think that there are more effective governance models that might work, shifting resources around or oversight around, and maybe in the coming budget, I'd be interested in your recommendations on that as well.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that dealt with item 3. All right, so that brings us to items 4 and 5, which we can take up together. Yep, okay. All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Josh Romer with the Office of the City Administrative Officer.
Sam Hughes with Economic and Workforce Development Department, Assistant General Manager.
I have an overview of the formation, the general work program, and current practices of the Asset Management Strategic Planning Group and how we work with other city departments in the evaluation of city properties and potential reuse.
Great.
Just by way of background, the Council authorized the formation of the ASMP unit in 2012. This was done in the context of the dissolution of the redevelopment agency and also recognition that the city didn't have the strongest capacity to do strategic planning for the reuse of our properties, and also in the context that we had a relatively ad hoc, unclear process for how we might be able to reuse properties, and also in the context of the formation of the Economic Workforce Development Department. So we basically had a dedicated department that was going to be able to implement projects like this. We didn't have, at that time, a way to identify the best opportunities, or any opportunities for that matter. So the AMSP group is housed under the CAU's Municipal Facilities Group, which is generally tasked with managing how the city uses its own properties and its own facilities. We work collectively with elected offices, other departments, and our colleagues at the CLA to kind of do this full evaluation process. And our key role, in one phrase, is that we coordinate and lead the city's evaluation, make recommendations to the Municipal Facilities Committee and to Council about potential reuse. So in terms of work to date, the more broad efforts early on, we engaged a consultant team to take a look at all the asset management efforts across the city, across various departments, make recommendations of best practices compared to other cities. That report went to Council in March 2015. But in alignment with those recommendations, the AMSP group has been working in tandem with other departments, the CLA, and the mayor's team, and led by GSD, to the most important thing, the first thing, is to actually develop an asset management database that is a comprehensive, searchable, shareable, accurate list of what city properties are and all the characteristics, so we really know how we can use those in the future. So that's a baseline.
Time dream of a lot of us.
Clearly, it's a baseline, very important effort. Beyond that, we have developed and proposed an asset.
Sorry, what's the status of that now? Is that
The status of that, General Services Department is leading that. They've issued an RFP. They've received 7 responses to the RFP. There's an evaluation team that includes a lot of different folks at the city. They're taking a look at that from ITA through HCID. The evaluation team, I think the work was supposed to be done for maybe over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks and develop a short list. And we have a pretty rigorous sort of process. There's a phase 2 of the RFP where a certain number of respondents, or potentially all of them, will come back and work do a number of exercises with data that's provided to them by the city. So we have a pretty well established vetting process for that. I don't recall what the end date is of the selection, but it's in process right now.
And so the end result of that will be a comprehensive database that includes all real property assets of the city, some definition of them, some presumably evaluation of them, or highest and best use recommendations, those sorts of things.
I think the highest and best use recommendations will be left more towards the city to basically make those sort of do that evaluation, do those decisions, and what you describe is accurate. The GSD effort will result in that, but that's also just one facet. It's much broader in terms of not just cataloging the city properties, but basically how do we manage them, maintenance, utility costs, how do we improve efficiency in city facilities in the long run. It's really a Swiss Army knife of a database that we're going to be developing here. But there's definitely the one key critical aspect is just starting with an accurate list of the city properties.
So, and I guess to that point, can we sequence it so that that part gets done and becomes available? But because the other part is going to be a lot more time consuming. I mean, figuring out maintenance plans and historic utility use and all those sorts of, that's a much bigger project.
Agreed.
Than just getting the list. That should be a pretty short-term project, I would think.
Yeah, and I think that we will hear later from the mayor's office. There are already efforts underway to basically get that done in advance. But that's
Great.
definitely the first item that we have to work on.
Great. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Go ahead.
So beyond the database, we've also developed and proposed basically a city policy for how the city will evaluate city properties and make recommendations for who actually implements those. And the purpose of this is to basically have a clear process. It's very clear. Beyond that, we've established a council pre-qualified list of economic development consultants that can advise our office or any other office that are engaged in economic development, and we've actually made a lot of use of that over the course of the last year and a half, and I believe at EWD as well. And beyond those efforts, we've been central to a lot of work getting CRA assets, government use properties and future development properties, as well as bond proceeds. We've been central to transitioning those resources to the city so we can use those in the future. So more specifically, our current work program involves around or over 50 properties across the city. These include some long-standing opportunities that have been kind of albatross properties that the city's never quite known what to do with, including Lincoln Heights Jail, West LA Civic Center, parking lots in San Pedro, TOD opportunities in Leimert Park near Crenshaw, as well as the CRA properties, including Bunker Hill Y1 and Reseda Town Center. Beyond that, we have funded and are managed a number of market studies, between 12 and 15 market studies, to kind of basically help ground the city's decisions about how to reuse properties. And so some of those are under efforts right now. I think 10 or 11 are already completed. Two recent examples of projects that we've worked on. One is at 6000 Jefferson. We were able to negotiate a deal with a local business owner that was fit for expansion. Didn't want them to expand outside the city limits. And so we transacted a deal where we received basically fair market value for a property and have assurances that the developer will build an at least a 50,000 square foot facility and hire at least 150 living wage jobs to be employed on the site.
It was in my district. It was a good deal. We worked, I think, with Miss Perry's office and CAO. I can't remember it. It was it was creative, but it was a good project. Yeah.
Another recent transaction that is set to close within a week or two was a swap of land between the city and the county near El Plaza, or El Pueblo and La Plaza, up just south of Chinatown, north of the downtown area. And this is a transaction that allowed basically the county to increase the size of a project that it was going to do. And in return, the city received some some money, but also we were able to assemble a property that's a really excellent opportunity site for us to develop parking and potentially housing near El Pueblo. So in general, the role of the Asset Manager Strategic Planning Unit, if you think of the life cycle of a project, from the germination of an idea through vetting the idea, evaluating it, recommending, having a council decision on it, moving to a transaction, and then compliance after the fact. This unit functions in the first few phases. We're basically working with all the other colleagues, whether it's at the various departments we'd work with, CLA, elected offices, and the mayor. We basically guide the evaluation of that process and take it through at least to city council approval. There's been circumstances where we've worked jointly with EWD where we kind of fluctuate in terms of who's holding the ball for how long, because we're kind of all working jointly together. But that's generally in the soup to nuts. We're like through the first 2 or 3 courses. And then we do maintain sort of an oversight role throughout the whole thing just to make sure that things are still going according to what council has approved. So that's the description of generally how we're working. The other entities in the city that work on asset management still basically have the same role. So the General Services Department is the city's property manager. They handle the day-to-day maintenance of properties, and they handle some of the nitty-gritty transactions. And any projects that are proposed for a specific type of project as approved by council, we will work with and hand off the project to that department for implementation. So most notably, it would be economic workforce development for many projects, and I anticipate also housing, community, and investment department for projects that are slated for housing. So that's the general overview of AMSP and how it works with our colleagues across the city.
And then specifically with respect to EWDD, the property development and disposition unit within EWDD is focused on acquiring and disposing of city-owned property assets with economic development value. In an attempt to better leverage city properties for sustainable economic development and job creation, EWDD is focusing its efforts on market solutions that treat real property as a productive asset. And so in support of this objective, EWDD will continue as it analyzes each property, each asset, in preparation of preparing real estate studies to determine community need and highest and best use of the particular asset, and certainly facilitating marketing approaches for the asset that might include gathering of information necessary to prepare requests for informations, requests for proposals, requests for publications, and the like. Moreover, we'll look to evaluate responses to the request and recommend the best suited development team for the purchase and lease of the development asset. And so in that regard, we're furthering our implementation with respect to negotiating with selected developers a development plan consistent with spurring sustainable economic development and job creation. And certainly we'll work with the city attorney office to ensure the economic development purpose for which property was conveyed is essentially carried out. And many times that's done through the CCNRs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the deed restrictions that we place on the property, making certain that the developer does essentially what it is that the city wants them to do in the context of the economic development plan. And to that end, EWDD is set to implement the disposition strategy with a team of professionals that include 2 property managers as well as a principal project coordinator, and certainly an assistant to help in that regard in terms of implementing the strategic plan set forth by the AMPS unit. Work to date, the unit essentially is preparing and releasing RFI and RFPs for the purpose of identifying developers, certainly managing several market studies for development opportunities, and collaborating with the CAO's office on disposition of city-owned properties, not the least of all is 6000 Jefferson, as well as El Pueblo and others. Moreover, we're collaborating with HCID on disposition of CRA-LA properties and working with LA County Metro Transportation Authority to study the potential integration of metro stations and properties on transit-oriented development projects on city property. So we're looking to implement the very plan set forth by the AMPS unit, and together I think we can advance the general economic platform and direction that we want to take the city.
Terrific. I mean, this has been a long time coming to get to this point. So how do you, with a given parcel, how do you approach realizing its economic potential? Is it something where you look at it in the department, say, well, we might be able to use that for this purpose, let's go see if we can find a developer who's interested in pursuing that, or is it more driven by the marketplace? Is it more that, because it seems to me, as a layperson, that if you have a comprehensive list of all the real estate assets and you put it out there to the world and say, business community, here it is, you come to us with your proposals for how best to utilize this, that you're going to get a lot more creative solutions that way than if we try to drive that. Is that the approach, or is it more driven from the city side?
Well, there are several approaches. Oftentimes, it's really best for us to evaluate our assets. And once we can evaluate those assets, perform the requisite studies to determine the highest and best use, then delivering that product, if you will, vis-a-vis a request for proposals from the development community, we can better gauge what's best for any particular community. It's always good to know what you want before you ask for it. And to the extent that we could do that quantitative analysis and qualify the project or the asset, if you will, I think it'll suit the city best in that regard versus having the private sector, if you will, dictate to us what it is that they would like to see on a particular site. But it's not to say that we can't collaborate with private developers, but certainly we need to know what we want before we position ourselves to ask for the same.
Sure, and I would never expect that the private sector will dictate anything to us, but they sure can come up with a lot of ideas because they know how to make a buck better than we do, and that's the sort of thing I'd like to. That's the relationship that I'd like to see us developing, where we have a list of opportunities essentially, and then the people who know how best to take advantage of opportunities present to us in a competitive way how they would like to utilize it, and then we pick and choose what's best for the city. But it sounds like that's kind of the direction you're going in, but just a little different slant.
But I just wanted to piggyback on what the chairman said. I think you're going in the right direction, but when it comes to having individuals that this is how they make their living, they look at something, we look at something and it may be red, they look at something and it's orange, red, and green, and it would be, I think, a mistake if we did not afford them the opportunity to share their visions and creativity with us as well. So I agree. There could be a lot to be learned, and we need to take advantage. They know how to make money. Where in a lot of cases we're not the experts per se. We know what a good project is. So I'd like to listen. I think part of what this ad hoc committee is all about is trying to get business engaged and giving suggestions, not to let them dictate what we do, but I do believe that they would have some good ideas that we definitely should vet and review.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to Mr. Hughes' comment, one of the things the department will be bringing forward very soon is an opportunity for private developers to bring private equity into underutilized or underdeveloped areas to encourage the growth of social enterprise. The department is the recipient of a grant called LA Rise, which encourages and supports the proliferation of social enterprises through partnership with groups like the Coalition for Responsible Community Development, Homeboy Industries, Chrysalis, just to name a few, with at-risk populations. And so when I present this after we've worked through some of the issues with the city attorney's office, it will give you a glimpse of how we might be able to create a public-private partnership through land use and a place-based focus, but doing it with private dollars and leveraging our city properties.
Great. Okay.
No, I think that's really the way to go. If we have this list, and we'll see what they have to say. And as long as you guys are thinking, or you're thinking that way, I think that's a good sign. We should take advantage of their expertise and their creativity.
Agreed.
Cool.
I hate to give examples because it's always dangerous, but take the Los Angeles Mall, for example. I mean, from the city's perspective, we might be thinking, gosh, how are we going to get those places rented to the kind of businesses that we like? But a business person looking at that might think of it entirely differently and think the Los Angeles Mall has to go, and in its place, we're going to build X. I think to Mr. Wesson's point, it's just sometimes the private sector views things without the kind of frame that we in government often put on it. And they might come up with some ideas that we think are just wacky, and there's no way we're going to allow that. But it's always helpful to at least hear the ideas. So, but it sounds like we're moving in that direction, and this is exactly where I've hoped for years that we would get to. So, thank you very much. Anything else to add on these? Because we want to bring up the Mayor's Innovation Team as well to talk about this a little bit further. So, thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Thanks,
and let's
guys.
bring up the Mayor's
Thanks.
office. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Don't get excited.
So-
Don't break your mic.
No, we're excited. And the reason I'm excited is, as you mentioned, this dream that the city's been really putting forth requests for at least 15 years. We're at the first phase of providing that information to you. Our team was actually created through a partnership with the LA Coalition for the Economy and Jobs. You may remember me, I served as the city's first Fuse Corps Fellow and designed what became the Clean Streets Initiative, and was then hired to lead this new effort. And we envision this being collaborative because what we've been asked to fix would require not only collaboration, but require an all-hands-on-deck approach to how we solve the challenges we've been given. And looking at our real estate asset management is complex. There are a lot of different hands that touch this, but it's also a great opportunity, which is why we're here. 2 of our 3 initiatives, first being real estate, second being procurement reform, will bring to this committee to really be our partner. And so we're here to work with the council staff, here to work across departments to make sure they have the infrastructure and the operational best practice that we can then bring toward the city's budget process through all the different ways to actually make it happen so that we can actually move the city forward. And so I'd like to introduce Shamel Graham, who's our project lead for real estate, who will actually give our presentation.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Thank you for the opportunity to present. So as Mark mentioned, our team is in place, and we've identified our initiative goals. We'll share with you this afternoon the course of action that we've taken in the first few months that we've been in place, what our initial findings are about the city's portfolio, and the priority initiatives that we've determined so far as a result of our preliminary findings and our next steps. So we recognize and understand that Council sees the value in our city-owned assets and seeks to increasingly leverage our city-owned assets to support initiatives that are being heard in a number of different council committees, which we have listed on the screen, including this committee, Entertainment and Facilities, Homelessness and Poverty, Housing and Economic Development. So as Mark mentioned, we definitely see this as a collaborative opportunity because it really touches many different focuses for the city currently. And so in our initial research, we've discovered some operational challenges for the city. One being the need for comprehensive real estate data, which is different from just procuring a technology infrastructure system. It's really developing the data behind all of our assets so that we can have that comprehensive listing.
Shit.
Also, we have the need
My
for...
wife, I'm in a meeting.
Also, we see the need for proactive, strategic, citywide plans surrounding our assets. And part of that is because of the inadequate technology infrastructure. Those are some other challenges. And then we also move to looking at the management of citywide real estate portfolio and how it's out of sync with best practices. And then also looking at for the management and optimization of assets dispersed among city departments. So as Josh mentioned, there are multiple different departments that play a role, and we're looking at how to streamline and make that process operationally more efficient. So because of the operational challenges that we just looked at, there's been a significant impact on the city, including a large inventory of underutilized vacant and blighted buildings and parcels, missed opportunities to spur economic growth and form a greater number of strategic partnerships, and then also the inability to capitalize on market changes in real time and leverage these assets even for civic initiatives. And so as a result, there's been a redirection of city resources from core responsibilities that have led to increase in expenditures for city. And so we see...
I'm sorry, before you move on, what does this chart indicate, the numbers?
It's a preview of where we'll actually map out how we've done the phase one of our data cleanse. And so what you see are some initial numbers around the city-owned public assets within that image.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so our data and communications analyst, Juan, will review that with you and walk you through our steps to do the data cleansing.
Okay.
And so as a result of the challenges that we discovered, we also realized that there's an operational opportunity for the city to identify and quantify all city-owned assets, to create a comprehensive listing of our assets, where they're located, and the core data that you need for any asset to make an informed decision. And then we also see the support for the infrastructure for coordinated real estate portfolio management, and where the city, there's also the opportunity to provide collaborative leadership in operational design and clarifying roles and responsibilities. And so our initial course of action has been to engage city leadership, including your offices, the CAO's office, city attorney, and really do an operational analysis of where the city is and where the breakdowns may happen when we talk about the management of our assets. And then we've also been aggregating data. And then also engaging our internal stakeholders. And so a part of that is also reviewing the numerous council motions that have been generated regarding assets, the reports that have already been commissioned, and different recommendations. So we've looked at all existing data. And the other part is engaging industry experts in forming academic and civic partnerships. So on the slide here, you'll see some of the entities that we've already engaged, including Pershing Renew, community partners. We also have a number of academic partners that we're really excited about, including Cornell University, UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate, Pepperdine School, and a private consulting firm, Compiler LA. And so now I'll introduce Juan Vasquez, our data and communications analyst, and he can walk you through our roadmap to reform as it relates to our data analysis.
Hello, council members. So I'm here to share the roadmap we've developed to get to reform, and this includes quantifying the city's real estate assets, understanding the processes involved with behind the operations and how we approach real estate assets, and really understanding and assessing the city's ability to make deals. To quantify the city's real estate assets, we took a 5-step approach, which basically started with identifying the sources of data. Where did it all live? Who owned it? Then we started by putting collaboration at the forefront of our efforts. We started aggregating the different files, be it Google Earth files or PDFs or Excel sheets, whatever it may be. Once we gathered that data, we standardized it where possible. After standardizing, we're able to start asking ourselves intelligent questions and answering those. So we actually analyzed, mapped, kind of dug deeper than the surface level. And once we did some analysis, we were able to pull actionable insights that align with the city's efforts. Some of the sample data that we pulled include the ownership of the properties. I'll shed some light on what that means later on. The use types and the current value of those properties. It is important to note that some of the challenges we faced is that there's no unique identifier for all of the parcels that the city may own. And what that means is there's no social security equivalent to this. So when we try to standardize and bring together different pieces of the puzzle, there's no one way that we can make sure this parcel equates with this other one. Similarly, there are missing addresses to the way we keep some of these records. They're missing assessor parcel numbers, which again are the unique identifier that we've kind of defaulted to. And as a whole, that means that the city lacks a citywide standard for how we maintain our real estate asset data. After quantifying, we went ahead and tried to understand the processes behind the operations and how we approach real estate. Here's an example of one map that just looks at the different steps involved with making a deal. This helped us understand the city's ability to make and close deals. And here's another example of how we went about that. In the next slide, you'll see that part of this is understanding visually the potential pact in the city's real estate assets. So here's one example as what that looks like. Now, after going through this, both quantifying and understanding, we'd like to share with you some of these initial findings. This means that the city has 55 different ways in which ownership is cataloged. 55 different ways. There are also at least 33 departmental lists that house real estate asset data. And the city owns a wealth of parcels, including commercial, industrial, residential, and vacant parcels. Additionally,
Let me make sure I understand. So 55 different ways that the name is recorded.
Yes, sir.
You mean in sometimes it's...
Sometimes it's L space A space city. Sometimes it is LA space city. Sometimes it is Los Angeles city.
Yeah. And to some extent, the county assessor has been a great partner in helping us understand what does the city's record look like based on what you know. And so we use that essentially as our baseline to match the 33 list of all the different departments against. But we did find it can say DWP or DW&P. And so that's how you end up with 55 different versions of LA owning all of these properties.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
What you're seeing here is a baseline number to attach our efforts to. So we went ahead and looked at how many parcels are available by district. The assessed value, which we understand is extremely undervalued, but thanks to cooperation with the county, we're able to get those numbers. And so we hope this provides some value in you understanding what's in your own districts. We know maps are important, and so we went ahead and, as part of our analysis, mapped out what the parcels look like. Where does one parcel end and one begin? So in one of those slides, you see the publicly owned parcels along the LA River, and also the parcels that are owned by the city around us here in downtown Los Angeles.
Yeah, and I think where strategy is important is, as you see with the map of the LA River, like this, there are other publicly owned parcels that fall within transit, within state, within federal ownership that also are part of the city. And so there's an opportunity as far as swamping or coordination or acquiring those properties if they're surplus or available to us. And so we really need the structure that can look at those holistically and make those type of decisions. And what we've shown you are screenshots that we really could present to the council staff more interactively so you can get a better scope of what is within your district.
Similarly, in this first phase, we've started to dig a little deeper, and what you see on screen are 2 sample parcels that appear on 5 different lists. Again, with collaboration at the forefront, we use the county assessor data as our starting point, but you see that they appear on a variety of lists.
And so this example there where you see one property is really viewed as under a lot of different departments' oversight. It can be on the brownfields list within sanitation, but could also be on the foreclosed list in another area. And so how do we then look at that data and see what is the actual right type of categorization so that we're properly making the decisions we want around it?
And all this has been bundled under our first phase of data analysis. The overarching goals for our second phase include clarifying some of those discrepancies that I alluded to in the assessor parcel numbers, addresses, starting to really map each of the assets by city council district and understanding what's there, and then categorizing the city's real estate assets according to their use types so that we can, again, embrace that citywide approach to city real estate.
And I'll actually walk you through really our roadmap for reform. Since we've really only been in place in team for less than 4 months. And so we actually think we've made a lot of progress toward really giving the city the infrastructure it needs to make much more informed decisions around real estate. And so what we'll do now for the next few months is really work closely with the departments, with the council, to really understand how do we actually implement the type of structure we want to really maximize real estate for all the different initiatives that really need to take place, whether it be homelessness, economic development, housing, to really move forward on these projects. And so now we'll actually walk you through what those initiatives are and how they serve as that framework for a larger reform.
And to your point, Councilman, when engaging private sector partners, part of the challenge is the operational challenges. If they don't know where to start or if there's breakdowns within our own city systems, it's not inviting for businesses to want to do business with the city. So part of our, one of our main focuses is really looking at how do we create a better operational structure so that we can engage the philanthropic community and the private sector for different partnerships to really make the city of Los Angeles a world-class city. So we've identified 3 priority challenge areas, including the establishment of performance metrics and information sharing capacity, real estate portfolio programs and opportunities, and the establishment of portfolio management structure and oversight. And as you see, they're all interrelated. You can't have one without the other, so there has to be a comprehensive approach to how we really evaluate and manage our real estate asset portfolio. And so now we're moving on to our next steps. Oh, well, excuse me, let me walk you through our, more specifically, our priority initiatives under each challenge area. So under establishing performance metrics and information sharing capacity, as Josh mentioned, is the citywide asset management system, and procuring actually a technology database where we can house the data that we're actually cleansing and completing for the city. And then also looking at performance metrics. How do we determine that a property or an asset that we're using is performing well? What are the metrics? When you're talking about how much space is leased, the vacancy rate, the type of tenants, and if there's room in our different facilities to have a mixed use of tenants.
And I want to add, we're working now on an interim asset management system. We're not going to wait until the procurement process completes to actually start optimizing properties. And so we've identified where some quick wins can be achieved by just getting us up on a basic system that doesn't include simple spreadsheets. And so you will see that process start to enable the departments to provide information much faster.
And with that interim system, we'll be able to then upload and import the data that we are cleansing, because as you're maintaining your data for assets, it's always an ongoing process. It shouldn't become stale or stagnant that you just input it in the system and you're not constantly reviewing it, looking at the changes and updates regarding each asset.
And who's going to be doing that?
So we're in partnership with GSD.
Yeah.
Okay, so that ongoing maintenance responsibility would remain with GSD.
Yes, because they're, through our structure, they are our property manager. And so they would be accountable for that.
Right. And that the technology infrastructure would help them operate more efficiently. And so under our second challenge area is the real estate portfolio program. So once again, looking at how do we optimize municipal buildings? How do we re-envision them? Are they strictly for municipal purposes, or are there other places where we can house other tenants as well for other civic initiatives? And looking at public and economic projects and legislation that may need to change in order to support the management structure that is needed to really have a more coordinated approach. And so then we look at the reinvestment of initiatives, financing tools, and strategic partnerships as well. And then when looking at portfolio management structure and oversight, we're looking at the management structure again as far as how do you operationalize all this information. And so our next steps are to continue to engage and collaborate with City Council and any other electeds and the departments to build out these reform plans. Also to engage expertise to map out success and determine best path for implementation. So like I said, we've already started engaging the private sector. And then also looking at how do we ensure adequate research for decision making, which was one of your questions as well. Having that expertise, part of the key component is having that data and then having the expertise to match with that to see that maybe one parcel we look a different way, it could be utilized for 5 different purposes, and then how does the city determine, since we know that it could be valuable in these 5 different ways, which initiative will we move forward with for that specific parcel at that time. And also assigning long-term placement of roles and responsibilities. And so this screen just highlights again the challenge areas that we've identified from our preliminary findings the past 90 days.
Great.
Are there any questions?
No, cool.
The one, I couldn't be more thrilled that we're doing this because, as I say, it's been a long-held dream for many on the council to finally get this information. In terms of optimizing municipal buildings, there are many aspects of this, and I think part of it is going to be to identify current utilization by non-city tenants.
Absolutely.
And this has been problematic in the past, politically, frankly, because there are many purposes that can be served with the utilization of municipal buildings. One is city services by city agencies. Another is used by community groups and nonprofits and educational groups and so on. And another is purely economic benefit use. Those 3 things can sometimes be in significant conflict. And I guess what I'm asking is, are we going to identify what all those current uses are so that at some point, the next step will be having to make the hard choices between continuing to rent to a nonprofit for $1 a year or inviting a business to come in and pay market rent. Or, those are hard choices that we'll have to figure out some sort of complicated cost-benefit analysis for in the future, I guess. But the first step is to comprehensively identify what's there now. Is that going to be part of this?
Exactly, and part of it, why the key component of what we started with is gathering the data, is because you can't make any of those decisions, make them as informed decisions unless you know all the data regarding the assets, who are the tenants in the building, do we have leases with them, when do their leases expire? So that's why, as Juan outlined, this is part of all the data analysis, to go and move towards a coordinated management of our portfolio and not just looking at one project as an individual project, but looking at how does that really look into, as we grow the workforce within City Hall, what are the space needs as well, and how are we looking at that with our existing tenants for nonprofits as well. So you have to have that key data to be able to make those decisions in informed ways so that you're not necessarily stepping on political landmines when booting someone else out and they don't understand the reasons why, and we don't have the data to support that.
Right, and then by the same token, we may be wanting to make decisions for 2016 on how to use a particular space in a municipal building.
Right.
But if we look forward to what the city's needs may be 5 years from now, they may be very different. So is someone doing that kind of projection, to consider what future city needs may be, city employment growth or reduction for the future before we start making decisions now, and entering into long-term leases or even intermediate-term leases, we're going to want to know what the city's going to need as well, including all members of the city family, I would think.
And I think that's an area that would really fall into management structure, because those would be requirements that really aren't built into how the city's currently managing our assets. And so we really need to look at how we build that into the plan that we present when we come back.
Well, great. We're off to more than a terrific start. We're
Thank you.
Going headlong into it. So so what's the timeline now for completion of this project?
So part of our next steps is our studying best practices around the world as far as managing our assets. So within the next 90 days, we'll be able to come back with some recommendations and looking at, because there's limited finite resources within all municipalities right now because of the economy, there's some interesting models that are out there on how municipalities are leveraging their assets and managing their portfolio to really address all the issues that you guys brought up today.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. And although he is not here, I do want to say that Mr. Cedillo, one of the movers on one of these motions, has importantly raised the issue of utilization of city assets to address the housing crisis in the city as well. And so I and I think many of us agree with him that is also an essential part of the jobs creation equation. And so if there are opportunities for utilizing city resources for enhancing our housing stock, particularly with affordable and workforce housing, that's certainly something that I hope would be part of this information gathering process as well.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, good work. This is a
Mr.
good
Wesson,
meeting.
any questions?
No, good meeting.
All right, then,
Thank you.
if there's
Thank
no
you.
objection, we'll go ahead and adopt the recommendations on numbers. I think 1 and 2 we're going to hold in committee, right, for further consideration in our March meeting. And then items number 3, 4, and 5, we can go ahead and adopt the motions. If there's no objection, Mr. Wesson?
No.
That will be the action of the committee then.
Call Jay.
Is there anything else before us?
No, those
Thank
are
you.
all the items.
All right. Thank
Thank
you all
you
very
all.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
work, everyone, and we are adjourned.